Jamal Washington had barely stepped into the classroom when the teacher slammed a calculus problem on the board, one so advanced it wasn't in the textbook. The class laughed. "Let's see if the new kid from the bad school can even read it," someone whispered. But Jamal didn't flinch. He stepped forward, picked up the marker, and within seconds, everything changed. The laughter died. The teacher's face froze. And what Jamal did next? It wasn't just math. It was a message. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. It was the second Tuesday of the semester when Jamal Washington walked into room 3B at Crestwood High School. The late bell had already rung, vibrating through the glossy white halls like a warning shot. But Jamal didn't run. He walked in with steady composure, backpack slung over one shoulder, eyes straight ahead. His posture was calm, too calm for a teenager entering late into one of the most competitive classrooms in the school. The students looked up. Silence followed. Not the annoyed silence of a class interrupted, but the kind that thinned the air and made it hard to breathe. Crestwood High was known for its test scores, college acceptances, and gleaming facilities. Less openly acknowledged, but just as true, was that its student body was 91% white. Black students were anomalies here, and when one showed up unannounced, late, and unfamiliar, the room took notice. At the front of the class stood Mr. Coleman, trim, early 50s, with glasses that seemed fused to his face, and a reputation for brilliance and discipline. His back was to the room, his hand finishing a long, complex integral on the board, with red marker. As Jamal entered, Coleman turned. He didn't speak at first. He just looked. A second too long. His eyes moved over Jamal's Nikes, his deep brown skin, the twist-fade haircut, and rested, finally, on his face. There was no welcome in his expression, no curiosity, just calculation. "You're late," Mr. Coleman said without turning fully around. Jamal glanced at the wall clock. "By maybe 10 seconds. 10 seconds is 10 seconds," the teacher replied coldly, then continued writing. "Take a seat."
No introduction, no acknowledgement of the new student, no warm welcome to Crestwood. Just an invisible wall, erected between teacher and student. Jamal walked to an open desk in the back corner, near the window, dropped his bag and sat down.
As he did, a group of students in the middle row exchanged looks. One of them leaned in to whisper something that made the others chuckle quietly. Jamal caught it in the reflection of the window. A smirk, a head nod in his direction. He didn't react. He was used to this. South Memphis hadn't prepared him for luxury, but it had prepared him for silence, for suspicion, for how quickly respect could be withheld before he even had the chance to earn it. Mr. Coleman turned back to the class. "As I was saying, the chain rule applies here, but this function's behavior at the discontinuity is the real challenge. Let's take a look." Jamal opened his borrowed textbook. Battered, spine cracked. Someone else's name scribbled on the inside cover. Ethan W. It wasn't even erased properly, just crossed out. The lesson dragged. Mr. Coleman explained with sharp efficiency, but his eyes flicked back to Jamal often. Each time it was like watching someone study a suspect rather than a student. After class, as the bell rang and students packed up, Jamal approached Mr. Coleman's desk. He didn't expect warmth, but he believed in giving people a chance. "Excuse me, Mr. Coleman. I think I was assigned to your class late. I transferred from East Valley, and I just got the schedule." Coleman looked up slowly, then down at a clipboard with the seating chart. "Jamal Washington." "Yes, sir."
"You're from where did you say again?"
"East Valley Prep, South Memphis." Coleman made a small sound in his throat. "We run things a bit differently here. I can catch up." "We'll see," he said. "You're already behind." Jamal nodded once. He'd expected more, maybe not kindness but at least neutrality. What he got instead was a dismissal layered in condescension. The next few days followed the same rhythm. Jamal came to class, sat silently, completed every assignment early, and left. He didn't speak unless asked. He made no waves. Still, the air around him felt charged. It wasn't until the pop quiz on Thursday that things started to shift. 5 problems, each progressively harder. Coleman handed them out wordlessly, and the room filled with the quiet sounds of scribbling pens and nervous breathing. Jamal finished in 9 minutes. He walked his paper up to the front, placed it on the desk and returned to his seat. Mr. Coleman didn't look at the sheet. He looked at Jamal, then slowly picked it up like it was a challenge thrown at his feet. When the papers were returned the next day, Jamal's was at the top of the stack. Coleman held it up in one hand and tapped the red circle at the top. "Mr. Washington," he said, voice sharp. "Perfect score. Congratulations." The tone wasn't congratulatory. There was something unnatural about the way he said it. Forced. As if admitting the truth physically pained him. A few students murmured. Some scoffed. Probably cheated. One boy whispered, "I heard they use phones in class at those schools." Another added,
He just guessed.
Jamal heard every word, but he didn't look up. He just stared at the numbers in front of him. Clean, correct, unapologetically earned. But the whispering didn't stop. At lunch, it followed him. By Monday it had evolved into rumors that he was older than the other students, that his transcript was forged, that his quiz was switched out. Even in group activities, Jamal felt it. A partner would roll their eyes. Another would forget to include him in the presentation planning. One girl even handed back his paper and said, "You might want to ask the teacher if this is the right level for you." Jamal asked himself every night why he stayed quiet. Maybe because his mom had fought so hard to get him here. Maybe because if he spoke up, he risked becoming exactly what they assumed he was. Angry, disruptive, too loud, too much. It was on the following Monday, exactly 1 week after his arrival, that Mr. Coleman laid the trap. The board was already filled when the students walked in. It was a monstrous equation, one that touched on advanced concepts they hadn't studied yet. Multivariable limits, partial derivatives, integral notation, that filled nearly the whole whiteboard. Students murmured. One of them laughed nervously. "What even is that?" Coleman didn't answer. Instead, he turned dramatically to face the class, marker still in hand. "This," he said, "is an advanced calculus problem. Some of you will see something like this in college. Some, never." He paused. "But maybe one of you thinks you're ready." His eyes landed on Jamal. He didn't say the name, but the implication was clear as day. Jamal, sitting in the back corner, blinked. He could feel the shift in the room, everyone turning to see what he'd do. Mr. Coleman raised his eyebrows. "Mr. Washington, care to show us what you've got?" Jamal stared at him. This was it. He'd seen this scene before. Not in a movie, but in real life. Set the black student up. Put him under the microscope. Let the pressure crush him. And if it doesn't, discredit the result. Still, he stood up, walked slowly to the front of the class. Mr. Coleman stepped aside with a theatrical gesture. "No calculator," he added casually. "Let's see what your brain can really do." Jamal took the marker. His hand didn't shake. He stared at the problem for only a few seconds, then began to write. Not with hesitation, but with rhythm. Fluid. Certain. He solved the outer integral first, then moved inward. He rewrote the function in a simpler form, identified a symmetry, and cut the work in half. Every move he made drew stares. Even the skeptical students leaned forward. The board, once a wall meant to break him, had become a stage, and then he stepped back. The final answer boxed neatly at the bottom right. Mr. Coleman didn't speak, not immediately, but his jaw clenched. Jamal handed him the marker, quietly returned to his seat. For the first time, the room wasn't filled with whispers. It was filled with disbelief. Mr. Coleman stared at the board for a moment too long, then erased it violently, as though the problem itself had offended him. Later that day, in the teacher's lounge, he stood by the coffee machine. Another teacher, a younger woman from the English department, glanced at him. "That was impressive," she said, sipping her tea. Coleman didn't look at her. He stirred his coffee slowly, then muttered just loud enough for her to hear, "I'll put that arrogant kid in his place. Just wait." Crestwood wasn't just a school. It was a bubble, a polished, curated suburb tucked just outside Atlanta, where the lawns were evenly clipped, the traffic lights always worked, and the problems were mostly hidden behind perfectly painted doors. It prided itself on excellence. Diversity, they said, was welcome. Inclusion was printed on brochures. But inside its manicured streets and model classrooms, something deeper and quieter lived. A silent code, one you weren't supposed to talk about. Jamal Washington disrupted that code the moment he walked into room 3B. He didn't wear the school-branded fleece jackets, or Sperry's. He didn't talk like the kids who'd grown up here, kids who had sat tutors since middle school, and whose parents had called in favors just to get them in AP calculus. Jamal's edge wasn't loud. It was the kind that unsettled people, quiet intelligence that refused to shrink. The town noticed. Whispers started at the bus stop, then in PTA meetings, then at the local diner. "Where's he from again?" He transferred from some school downtown. I heard. I hope he doesn't bring, trouble. That word, trouble. It floated around Jamal like perfume. Someone had sprayed behind his back. He could smell it everywhere he went. At his locker, in the hallway, on the field during PE. Teachers watched him too closely. Students gave him a wide berth, unsure whether to fear him or mock him. But what rattled them the most wasn't how he looked or where he was from. It was that he was better than them. And he made no effort to hide it. Within 2 weeks, Jamal was outperforming top students in calculus, writing essays in English that made the teacher pause, and correcting an error in the school's algebra workbook during a bored lunch break. Every time he raised his hand, the room braced. Every time he answered correctly, the hierarchy shifted. And that, more than anything, was the problem. Because in Crestwood, black students were welcome. So long as they were grateful, quiet, humble. They could be athletes, artists, or comic relief. But never smarter than the golden kids. Never top of the class. That was crossing a line. Mr. Coleman felt it first. He had taught at Crestwood for over 20 years. He ran the math department, like a private club, one with invisible entry rules. He prided himself on merit, but his brand of merit came wrapped in bias, subtle and layered. When Jamal solved the impossible problem on the board in front of the whole class, something cracked in Coleman. It wasn't just that Jamal was correct. It was how easily he moved through the numbers, like the logic lived inside him. That night, Coleman stayed late at school, staring at the surveillance footage outside his classroom, watching Jamal walk in, again and again. No cheating, no help, just confidence. He didn't want to believe it. He didn't want to accept that this kid, black from South Memphis, the son of a single mom, could be better than his Crestwood elite. The next morning, in the teacher's lounge, he stood by the coffee maker like he always did, wearing the same worn tan slacks, arms folded, waiting for someone to say what he couldn't. Mrs. Howell, the AP history teacher, looked up from her laptop. That Washington kid is something else, huh? Mr. Coleman didn't smile. Something. Sure. He's sharp, she continued. Polite, too. A little quiet, but that's not always a bad thing. Coleman stirred his coffee without looking up. Quiet doesn't mean respectful. And arrogance isn't the same as intelligence. She blinked. Arrogance? He turned. Eyes narrowed just slightly. You'll see. I'll put that arrogant kid in his place. Just wait. Elsewhere, the reaction to Jamal was mixed. In the cafeteria, kids picked sides. Some were fascinated, unsure what to make of him. Others mocked him quietly, parroting jokes they'd seen in movies. Calculus king, they'd mutter when he passed by. Math gangsta. But one group took a particular interest in bringing him down. It started with Marcus White, the school's golden boy, varsity basketball captain, 4.2 GPA, son of a local councilman. He'd always been the safe black student, clean-cut, agreeable, never challenged authority. To Marcus, Jamal was a threat. He'd spent years earning the trust of Crestwood's system, and now this kid, who didn't care to fit in, was stealing headlines without trying. One afternoon, Jamal was eating lunch alone, under the bleachers, his usual spot, when Marcus walked up. "Yo, Washington," Marcus said, tossing a basketball from one hand to the other. "Heard you embarrassed Mr. Coleman in class." Jamal didn't look up. "I didn't embarrass anyone." He asked a question. "I answered." Marcus chuckled. "Yeah, but see, you're not supposed to answer like that. You make the rest of us look bad." Jamal finally met his eyes. "That's your problem, not mine." "Man, listen," Marcus said, tone sharpening. "They already think we're dangerous. You show up acting like you're smarter than all of them. That's not winning. That's making enemies." Jamal stood slowly. His voice was steady, quiet. "I'm not here to play anyone's game." And then he walked away. Marcus watched him go, eyes narrowed. From that day on, Jamal had a target on his back. The school's administration pretended not to notice. Principal Greer, a middle-aged woman, with a permanent forced smile, liked to talk about unity during assemblies. But when Jamal's mother called to report that her son had been excluded from the honors newsletter despite having the highest calculus average, she never returned the voicemail. Mr. Reynolds, the guidance counselor, shrugged when Jamal asked why he wasn't invited to the math league competition. "We're going with returning members this year," he said. "There's always next time." Next time. Never came. Still, Jamal pressed forward. He spent hours at the library, finished his assignments days early, and kept a journal of every slight, every ignored achievement. He wasn't planning revenge. He was collecting facts. Because facts couldn't be ignored forever. And he'd learned early that in a world like this, feelings didn't matter. But data could break walls. Mr. Coleman, meanwhile, started laying his own traps. He began cold calling Jamal in class with questions pulled from college-level texts, assigning harder homework problems only to him. Once he accused him subtly of plagiarizing a proof that Jamal had written himself. "Are you sure this is your original work?" he asked, voice echoing in the quiet classroom. Jamal stared at him. "Do you ask that to everyone?" Mr. Coleman smiled thinly. "Only when something looks too polished." Jamal didn't answer. But later that night, he told his mother everything. And she told him something that changed everything. "You don't have to fight him," she said. "Just be undeniable. Let him set the trap. Then turn it into your platform." Those words sank deep. Jamal started recording everything. Not with his phone, not yet, but in a spiral notebook. Dates, quotes, patterns, a trail, because he knew this wasn't just about him.
Mr. Coleman wasn't a one-time problem.
He was a mirror, reflecting everything Crestwood didn't want to admit. And eventually, someone was going to have to hold up that mirror publicly. But until then, Jamal would keep building his case, brick by brick. And across town in the teacher's lounge, Coleman was already planning his next move. He leaned against the vending machine, watching the clock tick toward lunch period. Under his breath, he said it again. "I'll put that arrogant kid in his place. Just wait." By the end of his third week at Crestwood High, Jamal Washington had become both invisible and infamous. He walked the halls like a shadow, never raising his voice, never missing an assignment, never calling attention to himself. Yet his name passed through every corner of the school, uttered in whispers, carried in glances, and printed across grade reports that left some teachers blinking twice. He wasn't just smart. He was uncomfortably smart. And for a school like Crestwood, that was a problem. The kids who got A's were supposed to look a certain way, carry themselves a certain way, belong in a certain way. Their parents donated to the school, attended every PTA meeting, shook hands with the principal at fundraisers. Jamal didn't come from that world. His mother worked double shifts at the post office. His backpack was second-hand. His calculator, borrowed from a cousin who graduated 3 years ago, had someone else's initials scratched into the back. But none of that slowed him down. He scored highest on every quiz. He asked questions the teachers didn't always have answers to. And worst of all, he didn't seem desperate to be liked. That's what stung the most. The arrogance they accused him of wasn't arrogance at all. It was confidence unmarred by their approval. He didn't need them to validate his presence. He was already enough. And in a place like Crestwood, that made him dangerous. The tension began to tighten in subtle, relentless ways. At first it was small. Ms. Abernathy in chemistry accidentally skipped over him when returning lab partners. He ended up working alone. Coach Reed gave him detention for loitering outside the gym after hours, though he'd only been waiting for his ride. Then, in English class, his essay on native son, a paper Mrs. Porter had once praised aloud in front of the class, suddenly came back with a red B and a note that read, "Too advanced. Did you get help with this?" Jamal stared at the comment for a long time. He could feel the slow creep of something old and familiar. It wasn't just that his work was underappreciated. It was that his brilliance had become a threat, an inconvenience to the unspoken rules of the school's racial comfort zone. The phrase echoed in his mind, something he'd once heard a professor on YouTube say during a talk on systemic bias. Black excellence is celebrated only when it's convenient. The moment it challenges the existing order, it becomes a problem. He finally understood what that meant. The backlash didn't stay with just the faculty. Among the students, admiration quickly soured into suspicion. One day during lunch, Jamal was sitting quietly in the library, flipping through a borrowed AP Physics workbook, when a girl from his calculus class walked in and hesitated. She was holding her phone, whispering something to a friend. Both of them glanced at him, laughed, then left. Moments later, his phone buzzed. A message popped up in one of the student group chats he'd been added to during orientation. Washington must be cheating. No one's that smart coming out of nowhere. Facts. The message had no author. It was from a burner account. But the effect was instant. By the end of the day, the rumor had spread through the school like a virus. Someone claimed they saw him glance at someone's paper during the last quiz. Another said his answers were too perfect, like they'd been memorized. A third insisted they heard from a reliable source that Jamal was using AI to write his assignments. Never mind that he wrote everything longhand in pen, with detailed annotations that no software could generate. He thought about fighting it, speaking up, but to whom? His mother had already called the school twice about the cold shoulder he was receiving, and both times she was met with the same polite brush-off. We're monitoring the situation, or Crestwood takes these concerns seriously. Nothing changed. In fact, things got worse. The next quiz in Mr. Coleman's class came that Friday. A short 10-question test on integral applications. Jamal finished in under 15 minutes, double-checked his work, and handed it in. That afternoon, the class was buzzing. Not because of the quiz, but because of a post on a private Instagram story. It was a blurry photo of Jamal's desk, taken over his shoulder. No face, just his test sheet and calculator. A caption hovered above it in thick red text, straight out of ChatGPT. The post vanished within hours, but the damage was done. That weekend, Jamal didn't leave the house. He stayed in his room, sketching proofs in his notebook, rereading old competition problems from his former school. Anything to stay grounded. But the quiet inside his chest had changed. It wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, like he was waiting for something to crack. On Monday morning, he got called to the counselor's office. Mr. Reynolds, a balding, always grinning man with motivational posters on his walls, motioned for him to sit. "So, Jamal," he said, steepling his fingers, "we've had a few concerns come across our desks." Jamal didn't respond. He waited. "There's been questions about your test results. Some teachers are wondering if you've had help with certain assignments, especially in calculus." He said it casually, like it wasn't an accusation. "Help from who?" Jamal asked. Reynolds shrugged. "Well, it's not a formal investigation, but we want to make sure everyone's playing fair. Mr. Coleman mentioned that some of your answers matched not just the textbook, but his own answer key, almost word for word." Jamal's jaw tightened. "Because I study the same materials. Because I understand the work." "I'm sure you do. No one's saying otherwise." "But someone is saying otherwise," Jamal snapped, "and they're doing it without proof." Reynolds raised his hands. "Hey, let's not get defensive. We just want to keep the academic environment clean." Jamal stood. "Maybe start by keeping the teachers clean." And he walked out. He should have been more shocked. But he wasn't. He'd suspected Mr. Coleman was behind it, even before the rumors. The timing, the cold looks, the way he smirked just slightly whenever Jamal was called on. It all lined up. But knowing and proving were two different things. That night, Jamal didn't sleep. Instead, he opened a fresh notebook and began writing, not math problems, but names, dates, interactions. Every moment where his work had been dismissed. Every time his answer had been questioned when a white student's wasn't. Every sentence from teachers that started with "Are you sure?" or ended with just double-checking. He realized he wasn't just documenting his experience. He was gathering evidence. He had learned something else, too, from the city he came from. When the system doesn't believe you, you build your case piece by piece. Just as he closed the notebook, his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Watch your back. Crestwood don't like smart black kids. You're not the first." There was no name, no context, but attached was a screenshot. It was a cropped image of a message sent from Mr. Coleman's school email address forwarded to a group thread of teachers. In it he wrote, "We need to look into this Washington kid. I don't trust his test scores. Too polished. Too confident. Feels off." Jamal stared at it. The timestamp was 3 days before his last quiz, and the email had been forwarded to at least 6 other staff members. The twist wasn't just the message, it was where it came from. The screenshot had been sent by a student aide, one who worked in the admin office, and who, until now, had never spoken to Jamal. Someone who was supposed to be neutral. Someone he thought had ignored him like everyone else. But apparently, someone had been paying attention. And suddenly, Jamal wasn't alone anymore. The rumor had a source, Mr. Coleman himself, and now Jamal had evidence. But what he didn't know was that this was only the beginning, and the student who sent that text, she had her own story to tell. It started with a silence that felt different. The kind that doesn't just fill a room, it swells inside it, like pressure before a storm. Monday morning in room 3B felt colder than usual, even though the heater hummed in the ceiling vents. Jamal entered like he always did, on time. Low profile, notes already half finished in his head, but he could feel it the moment he crossed the threshold. Something was waiting. Mr. Coleman stood at the front of the classroom, arms folded, the whiteboard behind him curiously blank. There was no warm-up question, no bell work written in dry erase. Just one long horizontal silence, stretching from one end of the classroom to the other. Students shuffled into their seats, whispering. Coleman didn't move. Then, without warning, he turned and began writing. The squeak of the marker was the only sound for a full minute, as he filled the board with an equation that sprawled across both panels. A monstrous, multivariable function, with layers of nested integrals, and an unorthodox limit expression at the end. Whispers stopped. Jamal sat up straighter. Coleman finished, stepped back and turned to face the room. "I want to try something different today," he said, his voice smooth but sharp. He gestured to the board. "This problem is based on a concept we haven't covered yet. In fact, it's usually not taught until college-level multivariable calculus. But I thought, given how gifted some of you are," his eyes slid briefly toward Jamal, "we could try stretching ourselves." The class tensed. No one volunteered. That much was clear. Except Coleman wasn't waiting for volunteers.
Mr. Washington,
He said, voice rising just enough to cut through the silence. "Why don't you come up and walk us through it?" A few students turned to Jamal, some with curiosity, others with subtle smirks. Jamal didn't move. Coleman smiled. "You've been performing well lately. I'm sure you'll do just fine." There was no pretense anymore. No mask of neutrality. This wasn't about education. This was about humiliation. Jamal understood the game. Put him on display. Make him stumble in front of everyone. Tear down what he'd built. Not with anger, not with punishment, but with a slow public unmaking. A mathematical ambush. He closed his notebook slowly, stood up, and walked to the board. He could feel the heat of the room shift behind him. Mr. Coleman stepped aside with a practiced elegance. His smirk was tight, controlled. "This is a two-part problem," he said, as if addressing a lecture hall. "Start with the inner integral. Take your time." Jamal didn't respond. He took the marker and stared at the board. Not in panic but in analysis. He read it once. Then again. There were tricks buried in the equation. A poorly disguised substitution trap. A convergence limit that would mislead someone who hadn't dealt with infinite bounds. And an intentional ambiguity in the notation, just enough to derail even a strong student. But Jamal wasn't rattled. He'd seen harder problems before. He'd spent the last year self-studying from old MIT OpenCourseware, solving problems by candlelight when the power flickered at home. His notebooks were filled with challenges tougher than this. But none had come with an audience. Still, he started to write. He didn't hesitate. He began simplifying the inner function, factoring where needed, applying substitution, making clean transitions from line to line. His handwriting was neat, but fast. His process wasn't just methodical, it was elegant. The class, slowly, began to shift forward in their seats. This wasn't what they expected. This wasn't luck. This wasn't guessing. This was mastery. Jamal reached the midpoint of the problem, boxed the intermediate result, then transitioned into solving the outer integral. He flipped the limits, caught a sign error. Coleman had likely inserted on purpose, and adjusted the final answer to account for the improper integral's domain. As he worked, Mr. Coleman remained silent, but his face tightened. The lines near his mouth drew inward. Something was unraveling, and it wasn't just his plan. By the time Jamal reached the final answer, he'd used nearly the entire width of the board. He stepped back, capped the marker and placed it gently on the tray. Then turned around. He didn't speak, didn't smile, didn't even make eye contact with Mr. Coleman. He just walked back to his seat. The silence that followed was electric. Even students who had once doubted him, mocked him, sat frozen in the moment. The room had shifted, tangibly, palpably. It wasn't just about math anymore. It was about power. And Jamal had just taken some of it back. Mr. Coleman cleared his throat. "Well," he said, voice thinner than before, "that's one way to approach it." He didn't confirm the answer. He didn't praise the method. Just erased the board with a few sharp swipes, as if wiping away evidence. But the room had already seen. Jamal didn't need validation. He'd earned something far more valuable, undeniable proof. After class, Coleman lingered at his desk. Students filed out slowly, stealing glances at Jamal, some with new respect, others with unease. Even those who wouldn't admit it felt the weight of what they'd just witnessed. Jamal started to leave too. but Coleman called after him.
Mr. Washington.
Jamal stopped but didn't turn. Coleman lowered his voice. That kind of performance, it raises questions. Jamal did turn then, slowly. About what? Coleman stood, stepping closer. About how someone with your background manages to outperform students who've had years of preparation. Jamal met his eyes. You mean white students? Coleman blinked. I mean Crestwood students. Jamal's voice dropped. Calm. Even. I didn't come here to make people comfortable. I came here to learn. If that makes you uncomfortable, maybe you should ask yourself why. Coleman's jaw twitched. Jamal walked out without waiting for a response. By lunch, word had spread. Jamal solving the problem. Coleman's silence. The shifting tension. But then, another twist dropped. That afternoon, someone posted a screenshot on the student Discord server. A private message, anonymously leaked. No way he solved that solo. Coleman probably gave him the answer beforehand to make the school look inclusive. The message exploded. Speculation reignited. And just like that, Jamal's triumph was tainted. Again with doubt. But this time, something was different. A second message popped up underneath it. This one from a student who had previously stayed quiet. I sit in the front row. He didn't even pause. I've never seen anything like it. Stop being jealous. Then another. Y'all just mad he's smarter than the rest of us. Deal with it. The tide was turning. Not fast, not completely, but enough to make Coleman uneasy. Because once students start questioning the system, the cracks become harder to hide. And behind those cracks was something darker. Something even Jamal hadn't seen yet. But he was about to. Because while students buzzed about the performance, a far more dangerous narrative was forming behind the scenes. One that would aim to do more than discredit him. It would try to erase him entirely. Jamal's performance shook the room, but now a coordinated attempt is brewing behind closed doors to turn that brilliance into a liability. And the next attack will come not from whispers, but from someone holding institutional power. The room had never been this quiet. Not during finals. Not during surprise quizzes. Not even during fire drills. This silence was something different. Heavier. It wasn't just the absence of noise. It was the presence of something else. Awe, confusion. A shifting in the social gravity of the classroom. Jamal stepped back from the whiteboard. His final boxed solution, as clean and precise as anything in the textbook. Only faster, more efficient. He had cut through Mr. Coleman's trap like a surgeon. No wasted steps. No hesitation. He hadn't just solved the problem. He'd dominated it. And worse for Coleman, he had done it in a way that exposed the problem itself as flawed. Several students recognized the trick Jamal had avoided. A limit placement that would have sent most down a rabbit hole of misdirection. He caught it early, rewrote it, and in the process, shaved off nearly half the work. A more elegant solution. Smarter, sharper, undeniable. The board stood like a monument behind him. Jamal walked back to his seat, without a word, heart pounding but face still. He didn't allow himself the satisfaction of a smile, not yet. Mr. Coleman stood frozen, marker in hand. For once, no words queued up behind his lips. A few students glanced at one another. A couple blinked in disbelief. One girl even mouthed, "Wow." Then a slow tap began. 3 knuckles against a wooden desk. It came from the front row. Noah Sanders, the school's reigning math team captain, and a white student from one of the wealthiest families in the district. He looked directly at Jamal and gave a single nod. Then, a second tap joined. Then a third. Within 10 seconds, a ripple of admiration, quiet, cautious, but real, swept the room. But it wasn't applause. It wasn't loud enough to cross a line. It was subtle, a quiet rebellion. Coleman's eyes narrowed. He slammed his marker onto the tray and turned sharply to erase the board. Every motion was clipped and angry. He didn't say a word about the solution, didn't critique it, didn't explain why he had posed the problem in the first place. Instead, he pivoted immediately into a lecture on respecting process and not showing off. The subtext was acidic. Jamal sat perfectly still. He didn't respond. He didn't have to. He already knew what was coming next. Coleman didn't like being upstaged, and he especially didn't like being upstaged by someone who was never supposed to succeed here. The next 20 minutes dragged. Coleman avoided eye contact with Jamal entirely. He paced more than usual. His voice lost its rhythm. His transitions stumbled. For the first time, he looked exposed. When the bell finally rang, The students filed out slowly. Some lingered, exchanging low murmurs. Others cast backward glances toward Jamal, trying to mask their intrigue. No one said anything directly to him. But they didn't look at him the same, either. Respect had entered the room, and it wasn't going away. Jamal was packing his bag when Coleman's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Mr. Washington, stay behind." He didn't yell, but the room cleared faster than usual. Even Noah looked back once before exiting. Jamal zipped his backpack but didn't put it on. He stood, waited. Coleman sat at his desk, back straight, hands flat on the surface like he was bracing for an impact. "You seem to enjoy attention," he said evenly. "I didn't ask for it," Jamal replied. "You're not subtle. This whole performance, there was no performance. You asked me to solve it." Coleman's fingers curled slightly on the desk. "Don't get smart with me." Jamal raised an eyebrow. "I thought that's what you wanted." Coleman's eyes flashed, and for a moment the mask slipped.
"This isn't your turf, Washington. Don't mistake test scores for belonging."
The sentence landed like a punch, though no hand had been raised. It wasn't what he said. It was the way he said it. As if Jamal's presence in the room was temporary. As if this whole thing, his intelligence, his poise, was some kind of illusion that would eventually wear off. Jamal didn't blink.
Is that what you tell the other students? He asked quietly.
Coleman stood abruptly. His chair screeched backward against the tile. "You've been here 3 weeks," he said, voice rising now. 3. You think you're a genius? You think one problem makes you special? Jamal took a slow step forward. "I don't think I'm special. I just know I belong here as much as anyone else." Coleman exhaled through his nose. The mask returned. Cooler. Controlled. "Listen closely," he said, leaning forward. "There are systems at play here that you don't understand yet. You think you're ahead now? Fine. But eventually it evens out. And when it does, it won't be talent that matters. It'll be who people trust, who they see as one of their own." He leaned closer. "And that's not going to be you." Jamal's jaw tensed. But he didn't argue. He just turned, grabbed his bag, and walked toward the door. Before he stepped out, Coleman said one last thing. "I expect more humility from you moving forward." Jamal paused, then looked over his shoulder.
Then maybe try leading with it.
And he walked out. By the time Jamal reached the second floor, his pulse had slowed. He was used to confrontation, but this felt different. This wasn't about one teacher. It was about power, who gets to wield it, and who's punished for challenging it. What Jamal didn't know was that the game had already moved to the next level. Because while he was solving equations on the board, Mr. Coleman had been laying another kind of problem in motion. That afternoon, an email went out. It didn't accuse Jamal directly, but it asked open questions about academic integrity. It referenced suspicious consistency in his test scores. It suggested heightened scrutiny for all incoming transfer students, especially those with unverified transcripts from non-accredited programs. The language was coded. But the intent was clear. Coleman had started planting seeds, and he wasn't doing it alone. Within 24 hours, 2 other teachers, ones who had never even taught Jamal, co-signed the concerns. They'd heard about his unusual speed. They worried about equity in testing environments. They didn't mention his name directly, but they didn't need to. A system doesn't require a smoking gun. It just needs enough smoke to make people squint. That night, Jamal stayed up late. He replayed the board problem in his head, over and over, trying to find the exact moment the room shifted, trying to understand why the victory felt so temporary. His mother knocked on his door. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," he lied. She sat on the edge of his bed. "They're making you earn this twice, huh?" He nodded. She looked tired, worn, but proud. "You keep receipts, baby. Every little thing. I am. Good. Because when they come for you, and they will, you won't fight with fire." She tapped her temple. "You'll fight with facts." He smiled faintly, but the weight hadn't left. He knew tomorrow would bring more tests, ones with no answer key. But for now, he needed sleep and strength. Because the next time Coleman challenged him, it wouldn't be with numbers. It would be with politics, and whispers, and institutional weight. And as the classroom had already shown, it could be silenced just as easily as it could be awakened. The next morning, Jamal arrived to find a sealed envelope on his desk. No name, just his seat. Inside was a photocopy of a staff email thread, and Mr. Coleman's name was all over it. The envelope was thin, unmarked, and lying perfectly centered on Jamal's desk when he entered room 3B the next morning. It was a soft gray, a shade slightly darker than the school's stationery. There was no name, no stamp, just the envelope, placed deliberately where only Jamal would find it. He hesitated for half a second before sliding it into his folder. He didn't open it. Not yet. He knew better than to react in front of eyes that were always watching. Mr. Coleman wasn't in the room yet. Students were filtering in, buzzing softly about homework, weekend plans, college apps, but none of that reached Jamal. His focus was narrowing. His instincts said something was about to shift again. By the time Coleman entered 5 minutes late, unusually flustered, Jamal had already read the contents of the envelope. A photocopy. An email thread between staff. It started innocently, a message from Mr. Coleman to the entire math department, titled, Concern, Consistency and Academic Integrity Standards for Transfer Students. But the content was loaded. He questioned whether some recent quiz results may have been affected by unfamiliar grading protocols. He suggested that certain students unnamed, but clearly referring to Jamal, may have received external help, noting uncharacteristically rapid problem-solving times. He closed with a proposal that teachers should consider adding integrity checks for new students, like oral defenses or timed retests. 3 teachers had replied in agreement. 2 of them didn't even teach math, and 1, Miss Porter from English, had left a short note at the end. He's bright, but we need to be sure this isn't performative. Performative. The word echoed in Jamal's head, like a slur in disguise. He folded the printout and tucked it into the back of his notebook. No reaction, not yet. But inside, something was hardening. After class, Mr. Coleman dismissed the room without looking up. Students filed out casually, but Jamal took his time packing. He waited until the last backpack zipped, and the door clicked shut behind the final student. Then he stood. Mr. Coleman, Jamal said calmly. You asked to see me after class. Coleman's head rose slowly. His face was blank, expression unreadable. Yes, he said. Close the door. Jamal obeyed, silently reaching for his phone as he walked. His thumb tapped the side button twice, starting the audio recorder without lighting the screen. He slid it into his front pocket. Camera facing upward. Mic unobstructed. He returned to his desk and stood beside it. Coleman leaned back in his chair, hands folded across his chest. There's been concern, he said. Not just from me. Jamal nodded. I've seen the emails. For the first time, a flicker crossed Coleman's face. You've... What? Doesn't matter how, Jamal replied. But I know what you're doing. Coleman's composure cracked. Just slightly. I'm doing my job, he said coldly. You've made quite an impression here. Not all of it. Positive. Jamal didn't blink. You're not threatened by my intelligence. You're threatened by who it comes from. The silence between them thickened. Coleman stood now too. Slowly. Carefully. You want the truth? He asked. Fine. He took a step forward. I've seen this before. A bright kid walks in with something to prove. Outsmarts a few tests. Makes some waves. Thinks he's changed the game. He paused, looking Jamal directly in the eye. But brilliance doesn't guarantee belonging. Jamal tilted his head. You're saying I don't belong. I'm saying you're a guest in a system that was built without you in mind. And guests who overstay their welcome don't get invited back. The room seemed to freeze around them. Outside the windows, students milled in the courtyard, laughing, throwing frisbees. Inside, the air was thick with something else entirely. You could have mentored me, Jamal said quietly. Coleman smirked. You don't want mentorship. You want a spotlight. No, Jamal replied. I want fairness. But maybe that's too radical for this place. Coleman's voice lowered. You don't understand how things work here. Grades are only part of the picture. This community values character, fit, trust. You're not building any of those. I'm not here to fit, Jamal said. I'm here to succeed. Coleman leaned forward, hands on his desk. And how do you think it'll look when other schools hear about these integrity concerns? About the inconsistencies in your record? About how much you've changed since arriving? There it was. Not a threat. A promise. He was laying the foundation to stain Jamal's name before it could shine. I haven't cheated once, Jamal said, his voice shaking. But not with fear. With rage. But you know that. Coleman's tone shifted again. Cool. Almost rehearsed. No one's accusing you directly. But impressions matter. And right now the impression you're giving off isn't excellence. It's arrogance. Jamal took a step back. That's what this is really about. He let the words hang. You're used to kids who look like me being grateful to just be in the room. But I didn't come here to play that role. He turned to leave. But Coleman wasn't done. Just remember, he called after him. Every step you take here is being watched. One misstep, and the story becomes yours to lose. Jamal paused at the door, then turned, calm as ever. Then I'll make sure the story gets told correctly. And he left. In the hallway, he walked fast. He didn't stop until he was outside, behind the gym, alone. Then he pulled out his phone, stopped the recording, saved the file to the cloud. He stood there for a long moment, his back against the brick wall, breathing hard. It wasn't just the words. It was the realization that this wasn't a teacher trying to correct a student. This was a man trying to erase a young black boy's brilliance before it became visible to the world. And now Jamal had proof. That evening he called his cousin in Chicago, Tyrese, a junior at Northwestern, majoring in journalism. I got something, Jamal said over the phone. He forwarded the audio file, then the email screenshots. 15 minutes later, Tyrese called back. You're sitting on a bomb, he said. You could burn that whole school down with this. I don't want to burn it down, Jamal replied. I want to expose it. Tyrese was quiet for a moment, then said, You're playing chess with people who have knives, bro. I know, Jamal said, but I've got receipts now. Tyrese promised to connect him with someone who ran a youth justice blog, one with reach, one that told stories like Jamal's. But Jamal had another idea first. The next morning, he returned to room 3B before class, early. He placed a new envelope on Coleman's desk. Inside it, a typed transcript of their conversation, and a post-it note on top. If I go down, you go down louder. Then he walked out, and waited. Before first period even ended, Jamal received an anonymous message. Check the faculty meeting agenda. Your name's on it. The transcript hadn't even had time to settle on Mr. Coleman's desk before the school day exploded. It started with a vibration, barely a buzz in Jamal's pocket during second period. Then another. Then 6 in a row. Notifications stacked like dominoes on his lock screen. It wasn't until lunch that he saw what had happened. J4 Justice, my brother ain't crazy, he's just brilliant. Listen to this. His sister, Layla. She had posted a 90-second clip to TikTok, edited clean, captioned, and timed with music that hit like a fuse. The video opened with a still of Crestwood High's stone front entrance. Then audio. You're a guest in a system that was built without you in mind. And guests who overstay their welcome don't get invited back. Jamal's voice answered softly. You mean I don't belong? The screen cut to black. Text overlay. This is how black excellence is punished in America's best schools. Layla had used the audio from Jamal's secret recording, cleaned up the levels, and cut it into a visual sequence that burned. It was perfect. And it went viral before fifth period. By 3 p.m., the video had hit. By 6 p.m. it crossed 1.1 million. The comments were a wildfire. This gave me chills. As a teacher, this makes me sick. Protect that kid at all costs. Expose that whole damn school. By midnight, justice for Jamal was trending. Students at Crestwood started seeing their own hallways on the national feed. Jamal's name wasn't just whispered anymore. It was everywhere. Layla followed up the video with a second post. A thread of screenshots, emails, redacted names, quotes from the faculty thread. She didn't post anything confidential enough to get him in trouble, but just enough to show a pattern. Enough to say, this is not just one bad teacher. This is systemic. The story reached Twitter, then Facebook, then Instagram Reels. And then, predictably, the district's worst fear became reality. The local paper called, then the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, then BuzzFeed, then a producer from a national cable news station. Not even 36 hours had passed. And Crestwood High had become the center of a public firestorm. In the school's front office, Principal Greer sat in a state of slow-brewing panic. She'd spent her career cultivating a reputation for calm, for order, for polished leadership, but nothing in her binders prepared her for this. Her phone rang. Again. This time, it wasn't the school board. It was a producer from Rise Now Tonight, one of the highest-rated evening news shows in the country. They weren't asking for a statement. They were asking for an interview with Jamal. Exclusive if possible, the producer said flatly. We'd love to center it on the modern reality of institutional gaslighting in elite education spaces. Greer blinked. Gaslighting? His recording is already everywhere. The producer continued. Your teacher's words are on millions of screens. Frankly, we're surprised you haven't made a public apology yet. I'm not authorized to speak. That's fine. The producer interrupted. We'll just run the story without your side. Click. Greer stood from her desk, walked to the window, and stared out at the school courtyard. Jamal was there, seated on a bench, flipping pages in his calculus workbook, like none of this was happening. But Greer could feel it. The power was shifting. And for the first time in years, she wasn't the one in control. Inside the classroom, Mr. Coleman was unraveling. The transcript had been one thing. But the voice, his voice, that was something else entirely. He hadn't known Jamal had recorded him. He hadn't even considered it. That was the arrogance of someone used to moving behind closed doors. Unchecked. Now that same voice, his own, was being dissected in comment threads, stitched into TikToks, analyzed in news segments. A journalism student from Emory had done a full breakdown of his phrasing, how guest, arrogance, and not belonging were classic dog whistles in academic settings. He was a case study now. And worst of all, the district had gone silent. He was on his own. During sixth period, as he took roll call, not a single student raised their head to meet his eyes. When he asked a question, no one answered. Even his star students, the ones who'd always competed to impress him, stayed quiet. A classroom of blank faces. A silent revolt. He'd weaponized silence against Jamal. And now, they were returning the favor. Jamal, for his part, wasn't celebrating. He watched the chaos unfold with caution. With fear even. Because he knew how quickly public opinion could turn. Already there were whispers. Comments on certain posts asking whether the clip had been doctored. Whether this was just a kid clout chasing. And one question repeated. Over and over. Where's the full recording? That was the risk of going viral. The truth became currency. And the internet was full of people willing to sell doubt for a like. So he sat, waited, watched. Layla wasn't backing down. She scheduled an Instagram live. She opened with Jamal by her side, then let him leave halfway through, while she handled the rest. We didn't want this, she said to 12,000 live viewers. But when people in power try to bury you, you better learn how to plant. She told the story in her voice. The school's treatment of Jamal, from day one. The late arrival. The cracked textbook. The challenge on the board. The faculty emails. The closed-door confrontation. Then she dropped the kicker. She had a second clip. Not just the quote from Coleman. A full 6-minute segment. And she wasn't posting it yet. If they try to lie again, she said into the camera, we'll let the world hear everything. The warning was clear. The game had changed. Crestwood couldn't bury this anymore. Now they had to choose: confront the truth, or dig deeper into the lie. The district met behind closed doors that evening. Principal Greer was summoned, along with the superintendent and legal counsel. They discussed optics. They debated crisis messaging. They even floated the idea of suspending Jamal for unauthorized recordings, until the lawyer shut that down immediately. You'll be crucified, she said flatly. He's a minor. There's a public interest. You retaliate, and you'll be the next headline. They voted informally to initiate a neutral third-party review. But before the press release even hit inboxes, a second call came into Greer's office. Not from the district. Not from the school board. From the news producer again. Mr. Washington hasn't responded to our inquiry, the voice said. But we've just secured verified context from other students, and a second source inside your school. Greer's breath caught. Second source? Someone on staff. And with that, the power shift became a landslide. As Greer stared at her blinking phone, another notification appeared on her screen. A student petition titled "Remove Mr. Coleman Now" had already hit 25,000 signatures, and was still climbing. The term internal investigation arrived, not as a sentence, but a shield. On a gray Wednesday morning, Crestwood High sent a carefully worded email to all parents, students, and staff. In light of recent social media activity regarding one of our educators, Crestwood High has launched an internal investigation to ensure the integrity of our academic environment. During this period, all parties involved will be given appropriate privacy and procedural fairness. No mention of Mr. Coleman's name. No acknowledgement of Jamal. Just a polished deflection wrapped in administrative jargon. But everyone knew what it meant. Jamal was a headline now, and that made him a liability. That same morning, Jamal was pulled from his third period class by the assistant principal, Mr. Higgins, a man who wore discipline like cologne and never smiled unless someone else was in trouble. They met in the small student review room, a windowless space near the front office, lined with dusty trophies and inspirational quotes framed on the walls.
Mr. Higgins got straight to it.
The district has initiated a temporary review of academic records and protocol violations stemming from recent media events. Jamal sat still. He'd trained himself not to show emotion when adults weaponized language like this. We're placing you on academic pause from the honors STEM track until the review is complete. Higgins continued. Pause. Like it was a commercial break. Wait, Jamal said slowly. You're pulling me out of honors. For what? It's not punitive, Higgins said quickly. Just procedural. You're removing me from the program without a single failed grade, missed assignment, or policy violation, Jamal said. That's not procedure. That's retaliation. Higgins shifted. This isn't personal, Jamal. But it was. It was always personal when black excellence threatened white comfort. By fourth period, his schedule had already been adjusted. No more calculus with Coleman. No more engineering lab. Instead, Jamal was reassigned to general math and placed in a remedial computer skills elective, a class he'd passed 3 years ago. His transcript still showed a 4, but his opportunities had been quietly clipped. It didn't stop there. That afternoon, the National Youth STEM Honor Society, an organization Jamal had recently been nominated for, sent an email postponing further action on his candidacy, pending school verification. Another door slammed. That night, Jamal sat across from his mother in their small kitchen. She was silent for a long time after he told her everything. Then finally, they're trying to freeze you out. He nodded. I filed a complaint with the Office for Civil Rights, she added. I don't know if they'll move quickly, but we're not waiting. Jamal looked at her. I didn't even do anything wrong,
I know.
she said. That's what makes it so dangerous. You are being punished for being visible. Meanwhile, the school board scrambled. At an emergency meeting, administrators debated whether to suspend Mr. Coleman or let the process run its course. Some wanted to buy time. Others were scared of the media fallout. But in the background, a different voice kept pushing quietly, suggesting that the school focus not on what Coleman said, but whether Jamal's recording had violated staff privacy protections. That voice belonged to the district's legal advisor. Her recommendation? Shift the narrative from racism to procedure. It's not about guilt or innocence, she told them. It's about controlling the lens. The board agreed unofficially. And so the damage control began. They released a second statement, claiming they were equally concerned with student privacy breaches and would be reviewing all student recordings going forward. They said it was about safety. But what they meant was, we're still protecting our own. By Friday, the mood at Crestwood was split. Half the students wore quiet expressions of support, sliding Jamal nods in the hallway, standing beside him during lunch, defending him in group chats. The other half? Cold silence. Some whispered about his family. Others claimed the video was out of context. A few even accused him of dragging the school's name through the mud. Jamal didn't argue. He just documented every remark, every scheduling change, every teacher who looked through him like he didn't exist. He was building a new kind of equation now, one composed of patterns, people, and policies. And slowly, he was preparing to solve it. The unexpected twist came when he returned to his locker at the end of the day. A plain white envelope sat inside. No markings, no name, no note. He looked around, no one nearby. He opened it carefully. Inside were printed emails. Real ones. Internal faculty threads from over a year ago. And at the center of each one, Mr. Coleman. The tone was casual, almost smug. In one, he wrote, "We can't keep giving these kids passes just because they come from underperforming districts. They need to adjust to us, not the other way around." In another, "This new freshman Malik something got a 91 on his test, but I'm suspicious. He's the third transfer this semester to suddenly outperform expectations. We need to flag these anomalies." A third, "If the board wants diversity, fine. But don't expect me to lower my standards for anyone. They're lucky to be in this building." The emails weren't just racially coded. They were direct, repeated, documented, dated. One teacher, Ms. Kendrick, had responded with concern in an older thread. "This language is starting to sound targeted, Coleman. We need to talk." But no one else had chimed in. No one had stopped it. And the emails had stayed buried. Until now. Jamal stared at the pages, heart pounding. Somebody inside had just handed him proof. Not just about Coleman's treatment of him, but of others. A pattern, a history, not a single matchstick, but a drawer full of them. He put the envelope in his backpack, zipped it shut, and walked out of the school building for the day. His steps were slow, But this time, they had direction. What Jamal didn't know was that the teacher who slid the envelope into his locker had just submitted her own resignation and scheduled a meeting with a civil rights attorney. The manila folder sat open on the kitchen table. It was nearly 2 inches thick, filled with printouts, screen captures, dated memos, and internal communications that spanned over a decade. Every page, every line, added up to one thing: a legacy of targeted discrimination hiding beneath the surface of Crestwood's polished reputation. The emails Jamal had received in his locker weren't a one-off. They were the beginning of a paper trail that, when followed, led straight into the school's rot. And now it was no longer just Jamal and his mother at the kitchen table. Now his father was here too. They hadn't seen him in over a year. Not because he was absent, but because he was always fighting someone else's war. James Washington had built his name as a civil rights attorney in Mississippi, known for taking cases no one else wanted to touch. He'd defended migrant workers, challenged discriminatory housing ordinances, and filed federal suits against police departments. His reputation was clear: relentless, measured, and never unprepared. He hadn't planned to return to Atlanta that weekend. But when he read the documents his son emailed him, alongside the viral clip, the transcript, and a growing archive of data, he booked a one-way flight within the hour. Now he sat across from Jamal, reading line by line, highlighting passages, scribbling marginal notes with the same blue pen he used in courtrooms. "Tell me what I'm looking at here," he said quietly. Jamal didn't hesitate. He laid it out clearly: the coded messages in Coleman's emails, the sudden drop in grades for black students after their first semester, the reassignment patterns, the way teachers co-signed Coleman's language without pushback, and most damning of all, the language in archived staff threads: casual racism, dressed as academic concern. James leaned back, eyes closed. "Jesus," he whispered. "Then, how many people do you think this affected?" Jamal didn't answer. He didn't have to, because for every line in the emails that targeted him, there were 3 more with names of other students, past and present. One former student, Malik, a name that popped up repeatedly, had been marked as a statistical outlier after getting a 91 on a major exam. Mr. Coleman had flagged him to the department head, recommending a reevaluation of grading standards. No other students were flagged. Just Malik. Another girl, Asha, was removed from an AP class after scoring below an 85 twice, even though a white student with a 77 remained enrolled. The email trail justified the decision as subjective performance concerns. The pattern wasn't just isolated. It was systemic. James stood and walked to the sink, pouring a glass of water.
"This is more than a story, Jamal," he said. "This is a case."
"I know. Have you sent this to anyone yet?" Jamal shook his head. "I wanted you to see it first." James turned, looked at his son. There was pride in his eyes. But something else too: concern. Not for the legal outcome, but for the toll. "Once this goes public, there's no coming back." "I'm not going back anyway," Jamal said. "They already made that clear." His mother, silent until now, spoke from across the room. "They're still investigating him. Coleman." James narrowed his eyes. "And punishing the student in the meantime?" She nodded. "Good," he said sharply. "That makes the retaliation claim even stronger." He walked back to the table, tapped the folder. "This isn't just about you. We have names, records, policy contradictions. This school isn't going to bury this quietly." He paused, then added, "But we're not going to TikTok this one." Jamal raised an eyebrow. "We're filing," James said. "OCR complaint, civil suit if we need to, and press exposure, but on our terms, not theirs." He turned to his wife. "Have you talked to any of the other parents?" She nodded. 3. One remembers her son being bumped down a level after his first A. Another was told her daughter was better suited for practical math. James exhaled slowly. They've been doing this for years. Meanwhile, inside the walls of Crestwood High, the cracks were deepening. The teacher who had anonymously slipped Jamal the original emails, Ms. Kendrick, had resigned that morning. Her statement was brief but bold. "I can no longer participate in a culture that rewards racial gatekeeping and punishes intellectual freedom. What's happening to Jamal Washington is not new. It is merely exposed." The email leaked within hours. By the afternoon, other stories began surfacing. An older graduate posted her experience on Facebook. "I had Coleman in 2012. I was the only black student in his class. Every time I spoke up, he'd double-check my answers in front of everyone. When I got into Duke, he asked if I applied through a diversity scholarship. A current junior posted screenshots of grade discrepancies between her and a white classmate. Same assignments, different rubrics. A former substitute shared a story of being warned to keep an eye on the ones from out of district. And then, a student group formed, Crestwood Accountability Coalition, led by students black and white, who demanded transparency. They launched a petition. They organized a walkout. They circulated flyers with QR codes linking to an open letter addressed to the school board. And most damaging of all, they named names. Principal Greer tried to get ahead of it. She hosted an emergency assembly in the auditorium. Students packed the rows, some openly filming on their phones. She took the stage and offered a calm smile that no one believed anymore. "We are deeply committed to equity," she began, "and we want to ensure all students feel valued and safe." But halfway through her speech, a student stood up, then another, then 10 more. They didn't speak. They just stood silent, unmoving. Protest through presence. She faltered. Her voice broke slightly as she tried to continue. But the message had already been sent. Back at the Washington household, James prepared his statement. He worked through the night. Careful, precise. He crafted a document that would go to the district, the Office for Civil Rights, and the media at the same time. It was detailed, thorough, a blueprint of educational malpractice, dressed in polite racism. And at the top of page 1, institutional bias and academic discrimination at Crestwood High School, a pattern of targeted suppression. He cited every piece of evidence Jamal had collected, annotated, time-stamped, cross-referenced. The emails, the transcript, the viral recording, and now, Kendrick's testimony. "This is how you win," James told Jamal. "Not with anger, with evidence." Jamal nodded slowly. "Let's win then." James paused, looked at his son. "You already are." But they both knew what came next wouldn't be easy. The system wasn't just going to fold. It would fight. It would twist. It would deflect. But now they had something stronger than outrage. They had receipts. And for once those receipts weren't buried. They were coming to light. James made the final call to the press at 10:12 a.m. "We're ready to go public," he said. "This isn't just a student story anymore. It's a civil rights case." Crestwood, Georgia, had always looked like a postcard. Tree-lined streets, red-bricked storefronts, an ice cream shop with a painted cow on the side. Families who left their porch lights on year-round, not because they were expecting anyone, but because they wanted to believe it was still that kind of town. A good town. A town that hosted charity fun runs and proudly hung American flags from their mailboxes. A town that waved to police cruisers and said things like, "We're blessed, and we don't have those kinds of problems here." But now their illusion was cracked, and they were scrambling to tape it back together. The first op-ed appeared in the Crestwood Gazette 2 days after James Washington's public statement. "A community pillar under fire, Mr. Coleman deserves fairness too." The article didn't attack Jamal by name, but it didn't need to. The piece painted Mr. Coleman as a beloved educator with decades of spotless service, a man who had helped hundreds of students succeed, and now was being dragged through the mud based on edited clips and a social media frenzy. The author? Rachel Glass, president of the Crestwood Booster Club, whose son once got a recommendation letter from Coleman that helped him get into Vanderbilt. Other voices followed. A local pastor spoke up in church saying, "Let us not rush to judgment. We know Mr. Coleman. He's one of us." Parents posted videos of themselves holding signs outside the school gates. "I stand with Mr. Coleman." One group of PTA moms launched a Facebook campaign, "Keep Crestwood Civil," with posts warning that outside activists were trying to divide their peaceful town. They called Jamal an instigator, a troublemaker, a pawn. On a community radio show, one retired teacher even said, "Maybe that boy's father is just using this to raise his profile." They didn't want the truth. They wanted the performance of peace. Inside the school, Jamal felt it instantly. The nods in the hallway stopped. The whispers returned. Sharp, cold. Teachers who once offered faint smiles now looked away. Others marked him absent when he was present. His friends, what few he had, began creating distance, afraid of being pulled into something too political. The same silence Jamal had broken had rebuilt itself around him, but this time, it was quieter, colder, weaponized. He would pass two students whispering by their lockers and catch one word lawsuit. He'd reach for a door handle, just as someone pulled it closed faster than usual. Even the school counselor, Mr. Reynolds, who had previously offered support, now avoided eye contact altogether. In the front office, the staff's smiles tightened. He wasn't just a student anymore. He was the problem. At home, the Washingtons knew it was coming. They're circling the wagons, James said.
They think this ends if they make us the villain, Jamal's mother added.
But even James was surprised by how quickly the district leaned into the spin. The superintendent issued a new statement to the press. While we remain committed to investigating all claims thoroughly, we urge our community not to lose sight of the broader values that have made Crestwood exceptional, values Mr. Coleman has upheld for years. The words were surgical. Not denial.
Not accountability.
Just enough ambiguity to cast doubt on the truth. The board called for calm and asked all parties to avoid further media engagement. Translation: stop talking. But Jamal couldn't. Not now. Too much had already been said in silence. Then came the town meeting. Held in the local community center, it was supposed to be an open forum for healing conversations. But it was anything but. The room was packed. Teachers, parents, students, reporters, one microphone at the front, one timer, 3 minutes per speaker. Jamal sat in the back row, flanked by his father and sister. The first speaker was a white parent in her mid-50s. I've known Mr. Coleman for 18 years, she said tearfully. He helped my daughter when no one else believed in her. He's not a racist. He's a mentor. Applause. The second speaker, a former student who had won a math scholarship. He pushed us hard. That's not discrimination, it's discipline. More applause. Then came one parent who stood up to say, we're not saying Jamal is lying, but maybe he misunderstood. Maybe things just came off wrong. Polite claps. James leaned in to Jamal and whispered, watch how they gaslight with smiles. Then a black woman stepped up. Miss Kendrick, the teacher who resigned. She cleared her throat, held the mic with both hands. I taught at Crestwood for 10 years, she began. And I saw it. I saw black students subtly pushed out of advanced classes. I saw their work questioned in ways other students weren't. I saw how Coleman talked when he thought no one was listening. The room shifted. Some booed, others muttered, but a few, just a few, listened. Jamal isn't the first, she said. He's just the first with receipts. No applause, just silence. After the meeting, Jamal walked alone toward the back exit, avoiding reporters and former classmates alike. Then his phone buzzed. A private message request. Unknown sender. He opened it. He did it to me too, and worse. But I was scared, and no one believed me back then. I'll talk if you want. Just don't tell anyone yet. Please. Attached was a photo, an old school ID, class of name Marcus G. Walker. Jamal stared at the screen. He recognized the name. An old valedictorian. Barely mentioned in Crestwood history. His photo never made the yearbook. No plaque on the wall like the others. He had just vanished. Jamal typed a reply. I'm listening. 10 minutes later, Jamal received a Dropbox link. Inside were voice memos, screenshots, and a written statement. And what Marcus claimed was the real reason he never walked at graduation. The Dropbox folder changed everything. At first, Jamal had expected a few screenshots, maybe an old transcript. But what he opened that night, sitting cross-legged on his bed, headphones in, was a vault. There were 6 folders, each labeled by date, stretching from 20. Inside were emails, scanned teacher notes, grading rubrics, and most damning 3 recorded voice memos. The first was shaky, full of nervous breath. Marcus Walker's voice came through, young, uncertain, but clear. He said, I wasn't ready. That kids like me plateau early. I was 17. He told me not to apply to MIT. Told me I'd just be setting myself up to fail. Jamal closed his eyes, listening. The second voice memo was recorded after graduation. Marcus sounded older, angrier. They found a way to block my valedictorian speech. Said it was too political. They gave it to the runner-up. She was white. She hadn't even written hers. Coleman coached her the night before. I had a 4.3 GPA, full ride offers. But Crestwood made me disappear. Jamal listened to the last recording twice. Marcus's voice cracked in the final lines. I didn't speak up then. I didn't know how. But if your story is finally waking people up, I won't be silent anymore. By morning, Jamal's inbox had flooded. Marcus's story had sparked a chain reaction. More names began coming forward. Some alumni, others still in school. Anonymous tips, DMs, emails, screenshot. A mother from the class of 2011 sent an old email thread where she begged the school to reconsider her daughter's removal from the honors track. After a single B+, the reply was signed by Coleman and ended with, "She's probably better suited for general coursework." A former custodian sent a message. He used to say some kids just don't fit here. I always knew what he meant, but I didn't know how deep it ran. An English teacher, now retired, wrote, "I tried to challenge him in 2015, got pushed out the next year. They called me uncooperative." And then, another twist. A student named Tiara Daniels, a sophomore currently at Crestwood, uploaded a video to Instagram. She didn't post documents. She posted her report cards. Her honors status had been quietly revoked after her freshman year, despite her maintaining a 3.9 GPA. Her counselor's note, shown on screen, read, "Tiara is not a strong cultural fit for the rigor of our upper-level curriculum. Recommend reassignment." No explanation.
No academic cost.
Just erasure. The video went viral. Within hours, local papers were no longer just covering the Jamal story. They were calling it what it was, a systemic pattern, and it all traced back to room 3. Outside the school, the protests returned, this time organized. Louder, broader. It wasn't just students now. Former alumni drove in from colleges to march. Parents showed up with signs that read, "Gifted male dangerous. We were always smart enough. No more silent classrooms." Principal Greer tried to address the crowd, but the chant drowned her out. "How many more? How many more?" It echoed down the block. Inside, teachers who'd once ignored it all now had to walk past a wall of signs taped to the hallway. Student testimonials, dated grade discrepancies, photos of students who'd been counseled out over the years. Even the most neutral faculty could feel it. The shift, the reckoning. And quietly, a few of them started asking themselves how long they had stayed quiet, and why. Jamal stood near the edge of the crowd that afternoon. He wasn't at the front. He didn't carry a megaphone. He didn't have to. His name had already become a banner. But it wasn't about him anymore. Not fully. He watched as Tiara, Marcus, and a few other students he'd never even met stood arm in arm, leading chants, answering questions, owning their story. His father stood beside him, arms crossed. "You lit the match," James said softly. "Now they're carrying the flame." Jamal nodded. He felt it too. It wasn't about being the loudest. It was about not being the last. Later that night, a message hit Twitter. It was from a journalist at the Atlanta Ledger, a respected investigative reporter named Alana Prescott, who had been quietly researching the Crestwood story for weeks. She posted one image, a redacted PDF titled, "2020 Board Assessment Equity and Achievement Disparities. Internal use only." She captioned it. This was buried by Crestwood's school board 3 years ago. Until now, it was the smoking gun. The report outlined statistical data on Black student performance, honors placement discrepancies, and faculty disciplinary referral patterns. And every chart told the same story. Black students with similar or better academic performance were consistently underplaced, over-penalized, and discouraged from upper-level classes. Pages 17-24 detailed anonymous staff interviews. One quoted teacher said, "We've had concerns about implicit bias in the math department for years, especially with Coleman, but we were told not to rock the boat." Another line from the superintendent's private memo read, "Addressing this would create unnecessary community division. Recommend shelving report until media pressure subsides." The report had never been made public. Until now. It was 37 pages long. And it confirmed everything. Jamal stared at the screen. His hands shook. Not because he was afraid, but because this time, they hadn't just tried to silence a student. They had buried the truth. And now, it was unearthing itself. The fallout came fast. By the next morning, news vans lined the street outside Crestwood. Cable news anchors mentioned the town by name. Podcasts dissected Coleman's pattern of behavior. Publications from Teen Vogue to the New York Times picked up the thread. And suddenly, the narrative shifted. No more debate over whether it was just a misunderstanding. No more minimizing. Now it was a movement. That same morning, Jamal received an email from the Department of Education. "We've officially opened a federal civil rights inquiry into academic discrimination and racial targeting at Crestwood High School." Attached was a case number. And beneath that, "We would like to schedule a formal interview with you and your legal counsel." Jamal read it twice.
Then read it again.
He forwarded it to his father with one line, "It's happening." But even as the story exploded, there were voices still resisting. A local conservative group accused the students of destroying a man's life over a few words. The school board scheduled a closed meeting, claiming it was to ensure student privacy but barred even the press. Principal Greer refused to resign. In Coleman, he disappeared. His email bounced back. His house sat dark. Rumors spread that he'd been placed on personal leave, but the district refused to confirm. Jamal sat in his room, scrolling through threads, reading messages from students he'd never met, from states away. Each one said something different, but the message was always the same. You made me feel seen. This happened at my school too. We never had the words for it. But now we do. That night, Jamal closed his laptop and stepped outside. The air was quiet. The sky was dark. But for the first time in weeks, he felt light again. Because the truth wasn't just leaking. It was flooding. As Jamal stood under the night sky, his phone buzzed with a new text from a private number. They're holding a secret meeting. You weren't supposed to see the next report, but I have it. The school board meeting was supposed to be closed to the public. But by the time the doors opened at 6:45 p.m., the line outside Crestwood's municipal building wrapped around the block. Parents, students, teachers, press, all waiting. The buzz in the air wasn't just about policy, it was about reckoning. The media had labeled it the Crestwood Inquiry. But to those inside the town, it felt more like a trial, and the two central figures, Jamal Washington and Mr. Coleman, had been summoned to stand before a room that had already made up its mind. The boardroom was fluorescent and stale, with rows of folding chairs, a table lined with nameplates, and a single microphone at the front. The district had brought in neutral facilitators to run the meeting. There was no jury, no judge, but the tension said otherwise. Jamal sat 3 rows from the front. Next to him was his father, James, wearing a dark navy suit, not as a costume but as armor. The crowd behind them buzzed with nervous whispers. At 7:02 p.m., the school board president tapped her mic. We'll begin. The opening statement came from Superintendent Dawes, a thin man with silver hair and a voice built for statements that said nothing. We understand this is an emotionally charged situation, he began. But this meeting is not a trial. It's a community conversation about fairness, trust, and educational standards. Then, without irony, we will begin with Mr. Coleman. The crowd shifted. A few gasps. A couple scoffs. Because for all the outrage that had ignited the past few weeks, Coleman hadn't been seen, until now. He stepped forward from a side door like a man stepping into court. Gray blazer, red tie, hair neatly parted. He carried nothing. No papers, no defense, just posture and performance. He walked to the microphone, looked out over the crowd, and smiled faintly. I've taught at Crestwood High for 27 years, he began. I've watched hundreds of students thrive, regardless of background, race, or circumstance. He paused. I've been called a mentor, a coach, a guide, and I've never once let politics cloud my teaching. He let the words hang. Then, recent events have taken words. My words out of context. I do not deny that they were spoken, but I deny the interpretation. I never intended harm. I never treated anyone unfairly. I may have challenged students, but only to bring out their best. He glanced briefly at Jamal. What's happening now is a witch hunt, and I refuse to let decades of service be reduced to one viral moment. Applause broke out, scattered, but loud enough to be heard. The board president tapped her gavel. Order. Coleman stepped back, calm, polished, as if he'd rehearsed every word. He returned to his seat, avoiding Jamal's eyes. Then it was Jamal's turn. The board president looked toward him. Mr. Washington, would you like to speak? James placed a steady hand on his son's shoulder. Only if you're ready, he said softly. Jamal stood. His walk to the microphone was quiet but deliberate. No blazer, no prepared speech, just a backpack slung over one shoulder. He reached the podium and looked out, not just at the board, but at the rows of faces. Classmates, teachers, neighbors, strangers. Some sympathetic, some skeptical, all waiting. He didn't blink. My name is Jamal Washington, he began. I'm a student at Crestwood High. I'm also a straight-A student. A pause. Before I was removed from the honors program. Before I was reassigned. Before my name was dragged through staff threads and buried in a fabricated narrative. A murmur stirred in the back. Jamal raised his voice. Not louder but clearer. I've been told I misunderstood, that I misread intentions, that I took things too personally. He reached into his bag, pulled out a manila folder, held it up. The label read, Date, I didn't bring opinions. I brought facts. He laid it flat on the podium, then began turning pages. Here's a list of 17 black students over the last 10 years who were dropped from honors math after scoring above 85%. I've included grade reports, timelines, and class placements. Flip. Here's a comparison of disciplinary referrals by teacher. Coleman accounted for 38% of all referrals for black students in the last 5 years, but only 8% of total classes. Flip. Here are emails, screenshots, statements from former students. Every one of them shares a pattern: misdirected suspicion, forced silence, and manipulated opportunity. He looked up. This isn't about one incident, or one quote, or one recording. His hands didn't shake. This is about a culture that rewards silence and punishes truth. Gasps rippled through the room. From the front row, Coleman shifted. But Jamal wasn't finished. He pulled out a second folder. Here's the district's own equity report, dated 2020. Buried. Suppressed. It outlines every one of these issues before I ever stepped foot in this school. He opened it to the page marked with a yellow tab. And yet, nothing changed. The room stilled. Not even the board moved. Then Jamal stepped back, voice lower now, but filled with weight. I didn't go viral to be famous. I went viral because I refused to be invisible. He paused. And for the first time that night, he turned toward Coleman. You said I was a guest in a system that wasn't built for me. He let the words land. Then maybe it's time we build something better. Silence. No applause. Not yet. Just the quiet gravity of truth. And then, slowly, one person stood, then another, then a row. No shouting. Just present. Dozens of students standing in solidarity. Silent, unified, undeniable. And still Jamal remained calm. At the podium, with the folder labeled Data, behind the board table, one of the trustees leaned toward another, whispering urgently. A student reporter caught it on a live mic. They didn't tell us there's a second report, one we never saw. The room felt colder now. Not physically, but in energy, in consequence. As if truth itself had pulled the temperature down and replaced the air with a mix of guilt, awe, and reckoning. Jamal stood still at the microphone. The folder of evidence spread before him, pages like exhibits in a courtroom. But this wasn't a courtroom, not officially. It was a school board meeting in a town that prided itself on calm order and hidden messes. And yet here they were, watching a teenage black student conduct a trial of his own, in real time, with no judge but the public. It wasn't rage that made the moment powerful. It was precision. The silence broke with a cough. One of the board members, Mrs. Gentry, a retired teacher herself, shifted uncomfortably, glancing sideways at her colleagues. She hadn't spoken all evening, but Jamal's last line, "Then maybe it's time we build something better," seemed to wake something in her. She reached for her microphone. "Mr. Washington," she began slowly, "these documents, have they been verified?" Jamal didn't hesitate. "Yes. I've provided digital copies to the Office for Civil Rights and the Department of Education. Several of them are already public through investigative reporting." "Are you suggesting," she said carefully, "that this board knowingly concealed a report that highlighted racial bias in faculty placement and grading?" "I'm suggesting you didn't just bury it," Jamal said. "You built your reputation over it." The crowd murmured. A man in the back called out, "Tell it." Another voice added, "We've been saying this." The board president pounded her gavel. "Order, please." But order had already slipped out the door. James Washington stepped forward from his seat. He didn't approach the mic, but his presence added weight to the moment. As Mr. Washington's legal counsel, he said evenly, "I'd like to remind the board that retaliation against a whistleblower, especially a minor, is a direct violation of federal protection statutes." The board president stiffened. "I don't believe we've retaliated." "You removed him from his honors track," James interrupted, still calm. "You flagged his record for academic review with no justification, and you allowed Mr. Coleman, who you knew had a history of complaints, to continue teaching until public exposure forced your hand." More murmurs. Louder this time. "Mr. Washington, there are students in this room," James continued, "who've suffered in silence for years. You knew, you heard them, and you decided it was easier to protect your system than your students." A parent stood. "So what now?" she demanded. "What happens next?" The room tensed. The board president, red-faced, took a breath. "We'll move into closed session to discuss personnel matters." Booth erupted. "You hiding again? Closed session? Why not let us hear what you say behind that door? A chant broke out from the students near the back. Transparency. Transparency. Jamal stepped away from the mic. He didn't shout. He didn't raise a fist. He just nodded to the room. To the evidence, to the voice now too loud to ignore. He had presented his case. Now the system would have to answer. 35 minutes later, the board filed out one by one, stone-faced and silent, into a private meeting room just off the auditorium stage. Reporters craned necks. Students watched the door shut behind them, with a final click. And then, waiting. Long, suffocating waiting. Outside, it had started to rain, soft but steady. Inside, phones buzzed. Whispers spread. Fingers tapped nervously on chair legs. Tira sat with her mom near the front row, eyes locked on the closed door. Marcus Walker had flown in. He sat beside Miss Kendrick, his posture straighter than anyone had ever seen him hold in Crestwood. Across the aisle, Mr. Reynolds. The school counselor looked shaken. 2 months ago, he would have said nothing. Tonight, he pulled out a notepad and wrote something down. Even Coleman, seated silently at the far end of the room, looked like the ghost of the man who had once commanded entire classrooms with a raised eyebrow. His legacy, polished, protected, and passed off as brilliance, was now a question with no clean answer. 27 minutes into the closed session, a leak hit Twitter. Alana Prescott, the investigative reporter, tweeted a redacted excerpt from the second report, the one caught on a hot mic earlier. It was worse than the first. Not just data, but recorded interviews with teachers who claimed they were pressured to keep grading rigorous when it came to cultural balance. One quote, anonymized, "We were encouraged not to inflate outcomes for students from high-risk districts." The message was clear. If a black student overperformed, recheck the work. Another read. Coleman was the standard. If he didn't trust a kid's performance, others followed, even when the numbers said otherwise. The tweet spread fast. Crestwood Exposed began trending. And this time, even former Crestwood staff, quiet until now, began liking and sharing. The board was no longer in control of the narrative. They were on trial themselves. An hour passed. Then two. The rain thickened outside. Inside, the air was electric. The door creaked open. The board returned grim, damp from the storm. Everyone sat. A pause. Then the board president turned to the microphone. In light of tonight's testimony and emerging documentation, she began. We've reached a preliminary decision. The room leaned forward. Effective immediately, Mr. Coleman will be placed on administrative leave pending formal investigation and third-party review. Some clapped. Some booed. No one cheered. Then she added, the district will also be launching a historical audit of grading practices, disciplinary records, and placement decisions dating back 15 years. Jamal looked up. That mattered. That meant they weren't just reacting to his case, but acknowledging the past. The board president wasn't done. And finally, she said, we will reconvene in 72 hours to determine next steps for structural changes, including curriculum reevaluation, anti-bias training, and the status of current faculty. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't justice, but it was movement. And movement meant leverage. As people began to stand, a voice rang out, what about Jamal? The room froze. Is he being reinstated? Someone asked. Is he still on academic probation? All eyes turned back to the board. The president hesitated. But before she could answer, another board member, Mrs. Gentry, leaned forward, flicked on her mic and said simply, he should be. A ripple of agreement. Soft but clear. Another member nodded. Then another. Even the superintendent, eyes heavy with the weight of a fight no longer winnable, added, we'll issue a formal apology and reinstate Mr. Washington's honor status. Effective immediately. This time, there was applause. No celebration, but real solid acknowledgement. Jamal didn't smile. He just nodded once. It wasn't vindication, but it was a beginning. Outside, as the rain fell, James placed an arm over his son's shoulder. You carried yourself like a man in there, he said. And more importantly, you forced them to see you. Jamal looked toward the dark sky. I'm tired, he admitted. James smiled faintly. Good. That means you didn't take the easy road. Reporters surrounded them. Cameras rolled, but Jamal wasn't talking tonight. He'd already said everything that needed to be said. The data spoke louder now, and the system for once had no choice but to listen. As they walked toward the parking lot, Layla's phone buzzed. She checked the screen and gasped, then turned to Jamal. You need to see this. The governor just posted, And he tagged you. It happened faster than anyone anticipated. The headlines read, Educator resigns amid discrimination allegations. Crestwood's polished facade cracked wider with each printed line. Mr. Coleman tendered his resignation the morning after the board's decision. A brief note acknowledging the role my words and actions have played in continuing pain within our community. No mention of malice. No apology. Just resignation. Yet for those watching closely, the weight behind his quiet bow was undeniable. Simultaneously, the state's Department of Education took the case public. They announced a formal investigation into historic academic discrimination and inequities at Crestwood High, triggered by Jamal's data, media exposure, and mounting testimony from students and alumni. The Aquamarine State website updated its news section. State opens inquiry into systemic academic bias at Crestwood High. A beacon of reform emerges. For Jamal, that phrase carried both weight and irony. A beacon of reform born from his persistence. Then came the news that made even his mother blink at her phone. Several major universities had reached out, individually, offering full scholarships. One from Georgia Tech, citing his extraordinary roots in academic advocacy and resilience. Another from Spelman, offering a full ride plus a fellowship to study institutional equity. And two more from places Jamal had only ever dreamed of, Brown and Berkeley, each offering partial scholarships and honoring his leadership profile. He hadn't applied to most of them. Still, the schools had applied to him. In the Washington home, the dining table filled with colorful broadside letters from colleges. His achievements no longer questioned, but celebrated. At school, the atmosphere shifted too. Teachers who'd been silent approached him quietly in hallways. Mr. Reynolds, the school counselor, stopped him one afternoon near the lockers. "You've done something remarkable," he said softly. "I wish I'd had the courage to say it sooner." Jamal nodded. He didn't ask for praise, but hearing it finally felt like a footfall on a long stair. The school board issued a second public statement. Mr. Coleman's resignation, effective immediately. Jamal Washington reinstated with honors, profile restored. Enrollment audit and equity oversight to be publicly published annually. The official language was bureaucratic, but the meaning was unmistakable. Some doors had reopened. Others had never been closed so wide. The senior class photo captured more than graduation. It held history. Jamal sat front and center, cap on straight, tassel hanging down like a line drawn in chalk. Next to him sat friends he'd almost lost. Students who stood with him quietly before it was popular. Their smiles weren't staged. They were real. Graduation day arrived with the Georgia sun beating down like applause from above. The auditorium was split between robes and sunburned faces. Parents held phones and flowers. Teachers adjusted collars, giving polite smiles. Then Jamal's name echoed through the speaker system, and something else. The first few rows stood, wave after wave. By the time he stepped onto the stage, every chair in the house was standing. Or they would have been, if standing didn't already start further. He walked across the stage with a calm dignity that hid the years of tension inside him. When he got to the podium, the applause turned into shouts, tears, and long, proud silences. He raised the microphone, but all he said was, "Thank you." No speech needed to be crafted. Gratitude was enough. He descended the stage, diploma in hand. That's when he saw it. A student standing at the back, eyes locked on him except for one detail. He was wearing Mr. Coleman's class ring. The one Mr. Coleman had dropped when he left the podium on that night of infamy. Rumored lost or pawned, and suddenly back again. The smile Jamal had felt blinked, then stalled. The ring caught the sunlight. It glinted, and somewhere in all the cheers and the smiles and the scholarship offers, that single flash stopped him cold. Because some cycles don't end, even when justice begins. Jamal froze for a heartbeat. Heart pounding, wondering, who carried that ring? And why was it there? The halls of Crestwood High looked the same. Polished linoleum floors. Lockers in alternating rows of navy blue and white. The faint smell of floor wax, coffee, and something distinctly institutional. But Jamal Washington had changed. He wasn't wearing a backpack this time. He wasn't a student, or a suspect, or a target. He walked through those doors with a guest badge clipped to his jacket, his chin lifted just enough to signal, "You remember me, and I remember everything." It had been 4 months since graduation. 4 months since Mr. Coleman's resignation made the front page of the state paper. 4 months since the investigation opened, and 3 since it expanded statewide to include other schools with eerily similar patterns. And now Jamal was back. Invited, not demanded. Welcomed, not watched. The invitation had come from Principal Greer herself. Her tone in the email was formal but changed. Jamal, we believe your journey represents not just perseverance, but a turning point. We'd be honored to have you return as part of our Voices of Change student-led speaker series. James Washington, always careful, had cautioned him. You sure you want to go back? Jamal nodded. It's not about proving anything anymore. Then what is it? He thought for a moment. Closure. But he hadn't told his father the full truth. He hadn't mentioned the student with Mr. Coleman's ring. He hadn't mentioned how that flash haunted him. It was a ghost he wasn't ready to name, but one he wanted to face on his own terms. Room 3B hadn't changed. Still too cold. Still lined with whiteboards and identical desks bolted just far enough apart to feel isolating. But today, the room was packed. It wasn't just students. Some teachers came too, including those who had stayed silent last year. Even Ms. Kendrick returned, sitting quietly in the back, arms crossed but eyes warm. Jamal walked to the front and turned. For a moment, the silence weighed on him again. Then someone clapped. Another followed. And then the room burst. Not with polite applause, but with something stronger. Respect. Recognition. He held up a hand and smiled slightly. I appreciate it, he said, but I'm not here to be applauded. The room quieted. I'm here to talk about what happens when truth becomes inconvenient, and what you do when the spotlight turns off. He didn't speak like a student anymore. He didn't need a podium. He walked while he talked, letting the words move as much as his steps. I used to think that solving an equation was about getting the right answer, he said. Turns out that's just the first step. He stopped near the whiteboard, the same one where Coleman had tried to humiliate him months before. Sometimes the hard part is showing your work. Laughter. Nods. He pulled a marker from his coat pocket. I want to show you something. And then, in quiet, deliberate strokes, he began writing. It wasn't a standard equation. It was layered. Abstract. Fx bx all rx. Can anyone guess what this represents? He asked. Hands rose cautiously. One girl ventured. Some kind of composite function? Sort of, he said. This is a function of bias. He pointed to each variable. Bx stands for bias, the unconscious inputs that shape the system. Rx is resistance. Every time someone speaks up. And ses is silence. He underlined that one twice. That's the variable that multiplies everything else. He let the room sit in that. Silence doesn't make the problem go away. It makes it exponential. The students leaned forward. They weren't being taught. They were being given a language. He moved to the second board. Now let's look at the inverse function, he said. He wrote slowly. T-Y-E-T is truth, he explained. Which equals evidence divided by comfort. He smiled faintly. The more comfortable the system, the less likely the truth comes out. Unless, he looked out across the room, unless you make it uncomfortable to keep it hidden. Silence again. This time, it was reverent. He turned back to the board, marker still in hand. I'm not a teacher, he said. But I came back because this place, this classroom, is where I was almost convinced I didn't belong. He tapped the whiteboard gently. This board tried to define me, but now I get to define the board. And then he erased everything, cleared the space, and wrote a new equation. Justice equals truth pause accountability, memory. He stepped aside, turned back to the room. Now, who's ready to solve this? In the back of the room, a new math teacher stands, watching closely, his ring hand clenched behind his back. No one should have to solve equations just to prove they deserve respect.
No student should carry the weight of an entire system's bias on their back, just to be seen.
If this story moved you, if you've ever felt the silence speak louder than the truth, type yes if you believe in justice, and subscribe if this broke your heart.